Check 1, 2. What's up, guys? Hyperbits here, and today I want to go over 7 of my all-time favorite music production techniques and tips, hacks, whatever you want to call it, that I've learned over the past 10 years or so of making music. So this is going to be the stuff that sort of disproportionately outweighs almost all the other techniques and tips out there. This is the stuff that really helps you make your music sound more professional, makes your music sound more polished, more radio ready, all those verbiages that basically just describe the fact that your music will sound really good if you implement all of these techniques right now. So that said, I'm gonna jump right into it. Let's just get started. Okay, so starting off, we've got saturation. One of the most crucial ways for digital sounds in your mix to have added impact is to make your sounds feel more analog and alive and full. You see, that's exactly what saturation does. It actually fills up the frequency spectrum by adding flavored harmonic frequencies both above and below your original sound. So when that original sound is a bit weak and lacking character or whatever, saturation fixes that issue. Take a listen to how powerful saturation can be on an individual sound. And now listen to what this can do to your mix when applied throughout all of your samples and sounds and layers. It's pretty amazing what saturation can do. Okay, the next tip is a big one because it's all about making professional transitions. And I'm going to break this down into 4 simple steps that you can always think about and refer to whenever you transition from any one section into another. Now, I think most producers simply add an uplifter and downlifter sample for their transitions. And while that's an okay starting point, it's pretty amateur and doesn't give your track that truly professional feel. So here's an example of what not to do. Now, that wasn't that bad, but we can definitely do better. But all right, the 4 steps or categories to incredible transitions are reverb and delay throws, sound design automation, reverses, and fill elements. So automating a reverb and delay throw can really smooth out transitions, like when certain sounds are being removed from one section to another. And all you need to do to create this effect is configure a reverb and delay to slowly engage over time at the end of a section. That's so much cooler. Now, modulating the sound design of a sound during a transition also helps create interest and just gives your track more of a unique vibe. So find a parameter in your synth that you can automate so that the sound changes as you come to the transition. Let's do some quick automation. Now with the track. Hell yeah, that sounds so much better. Okay, now reversing sounds is super simple, and you might already know this, but it's worth pointing out because it can help build tension in your transition substantially. You can use existing sounds in your mix or even find a new sound that, when reversed, helps create that transitioning style effect. Let's stretch that. And let's reverse that. Let's add some effects. Just gonna lower the volume a little. Yeah, that's pretty nice. And even add a few of these layering reverse style effects. I'm just going to take this downlifter, reverse it, and fade it. Now let's hear that in the track. Simple, but really cool. And finally, introducing unique fill elements will help round out your transition and carry you into the next section. Some producers will use drum or percussion sounds for this, but I like to use synth fills and melodic motifs if possible. That's pretty. Let's hear that in the track. But it can also really help to include drum fills too. So just make sure that any drum fill sample you use is in time with the track, utilizing proper time stretching and warping. You can even chop up loops just to make them your own. Then just add some simple effects like reverb, for example, to give your drum fill that gloss and polish that it needs in the mix. Let's hear that. And when you take the time to do all 4 of these techniques at once, you end up going from something like this to this. And while some of these techniques were a bit subtle, the overall effect of adding these details is a truly more polished, professional, and smooth transition. All right, number 3 is layering, which is interesting because most producers starting out think that layering is only about making your sounds bigger or fatter. But in reality, layering is the best way to make your sound design unique and give your sounds enough energy and fullness to fill their place in the track. When you layer, the idea is to stack different sounds with the same melodic or harmonic content on top of each other. The key is to make sure to always stack layers that fundamentally sound different so that we're not just making an existing sound louder, but that we're actually creating a new and more complex timbre. Timbre, by the way, is the character of a musical sound. So that's what makes a C note that's played on a guitar different from the exact same C note that's played on a piano, for example. But when layering, make sure that your layers don't actually compete with each other too much. Listen to how much more exciting this idea gets when I start to introduce well thought out layers. Let's add a detuned layer. Let's add a bass layer. Now a lead layer. Now a choir layer. Now a rhythmic layer. Now let's hear what all of that's doing. Pretty cool, right? For tip number 4, I'm going to show you the concept of stealing kicks. Now, theoretically, you could do this with any sound, but we're going to focus on kicks because A, kicks are the most important sample in electronic music productions, and B, you can pretty much ruin any track if your kick drum is just not up to par. So you can actually sample any kick from any song using a really simple technique. To start, use any plugin that can solo 4 different frequency bands of a sound. I like to use Isotope's Ozone Imager, but again, any plugin that can achieve this will do. Duplicate the track you're sampling from 4 times, and in each track, solo a different part of the spectrum. I like to break it down like this. Next, convert each of these tracks to audio and isolate the kick drum. Use fades on each track to cut out all other sounds from those frequency ranges that aren't the kick itself. Take a listen to how I isolate this kick sample. Now let's start fading out everything that's not the kick. The basic principle here is that the higher you go in frequency, the more that you can fade out. Finally, you can resample what you have left to create a single sample kick drum taken from your favorite reference track. Now, listen to how accurate and usable these kicks can be. And that's our kick. It's pretty much the same. For number 5, I'm going to reveal my secret weapon multiband compression technique. And without getting too in-depth, multiband compression just helps maximize a sound and balance its tone across the frequency spectrum. I like to use a modified version of over-the-top compression that combines both upward and downward compression at once. but only on the mid-range and lower frequencies. We can really get into producer and engineer vocab here, but the main idea is that this effect maximizes your sounds in the right part of the frequency spectrum that all of our ears are most attuned to hearing. I'm using the Ableton Multiband Compressor here to do this, but you can achieve the same effect in any DAW using Xfer Records OTT Compressor, which is a free plugin, by the way. Now let's add some OTT. And let's hear that in the mix. When this effect is done correctly, it essentially masters individual sounds in order to achieve the fullest sounding mix that you could possibly create. Okay, so number 6, let's talk about creating more interesting movement with auto panners and effects. Listen to how this synth line is already pretty dope, but it's very focused down the middle of the mix. Now, if we set up an auto panner like Soundtoys Pan Man, we can have the synth line move back and forth over time, creating a much more alive and interesting moment in the mix. We can also think about movement in the volume of the sound itself and use auto panners to create bounce and wobble in the sound. Let's take that same synth line and give it a dope 16th note wobble effect using a simple auto panner with the phase set to 0. You want to adjust the offset to make the wobble on beat here. Now all of that in the track. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Beyond auto panners, you can achieve tons and tons of movement with all sorts of effects over time using everything from delay to manipulating synths ADSR or cutoff or even just simple gain automation, right? And if you know what you're doing and you put it all together, your track will be the opposite of dull and lifeless. And once you have a good grasp on stereo movement, you can even use it strategically with something like the mono build trick, where you simply send your track towards mono during the build, for example, and then the entire drop will have much, much more impact once you return to the full stereo image. And last but not least, I want to take a second to talk about finishing music. This should actually be everyone's number one biggest goal and priority, especially when you're still developing as a producer and haven't gotten to that professionalism in your music quite yet. So I want to cover 3 things to think about in order to finish a lot more music. Number 1, it's all about quantity over quality. If you want to get good at something, you need to make a volume of work. You need to actually struggle through project after project so that you can create that muscle memory for all things inside of music production. And if that doesn't land for any reason, think about it this way. Who's going to be a better writer after an entire year? The writer who spent an entire year working on one individual short story, or the writer that wrote a short story every single day for the entire year and got in the habit of finishing consistently? Which leads right into point number 2 here. Don't get hung up on trying to make the perfect song. Just make decent tracks and allow yourself to experiment and learn from your mistakes. There's really no amount of tweaking and fiddling and adjusting that same track that you've been working on for months that will make it that much better. Work on the next one if you want to improve. And lastly, number 3, make sure to set deadlines, because it can be really easy to accidentally spend weeks, months, maybe even years on a single track and not even see that much, results or see it get any better. My recommendation to you is to set a reasonable deadline for when the song needs to be finished and stick to that like it's your job. All right, and there you have it. That's 7 killer production techniques that will help you achieve a more professional result in your music. And if you're interested in learning more from me, be sure to check out the Hyperbits Masterclass, where our students have been streamed over 1 billion times on Spotify alone. Thanks for sticking around, and as always, happy producing.